I'm Tom Bryant. I'm president of the West Off Speaker Series, and we're happy and honored to have all of you here tonight, and most certainly our guests, which you'll hear more about. We have what I believe is one of our best sessions yet this season, and with your help and support, this organization and your programs, I think will continue to improve and grow. We appreciate your support. As has been mentioned many times before, the benefit of Hot Springs Village was the brainchild of the late Wilbur Smith. Wilbur discussed this for some time, and through a partnership with your POA organization and board, he began this program. I'd like to introduce our Speaker Series board, and after our featured speaker for this evening, I'll briefly describe the future programs for the season. The board has a full season lined up for 2016-17, and we're currently working on lining up speakers for 2017-18. Would each of our board members please stand? John Hollingsworth, Catherine Muller, Cindy Erickson, Jerry Urick, and Susan McCarthy. Also unable to attend tonight, two other board members, Carolyn Bowers and Roldan White. These are the people who work. I also like to recognize a former board member who's been instrumental and extremely helpful in finding the speakers for us, and that's Jeff. Jeff, thanks very much for everything. He's probably all the way back. So it's a pleasure for me to ask John Hollingsworth, one of our founding board members, to introduce our evening speaker. John.
I'd like to welcome you too, and second what Tom said already, we're just delighted that you came tonight and that you're part of this activity. I think you'll be pleased, and as he said, there's some other good meetings coming, and we'd like to make sure you're in, that we know you're invited to those. Tonight's, I better say this up front, because it so happens Jerry is our nephew. I don't want you to hold that against him. He is our nephew. We haven't lived in the same town for a long time. He was in Air Force Academy when Jay and I lived in Colorado Springs, and we had a little bit of exposure to the Air Force Academy. I know there's several Air Force Academy graduates here tonight that's identified and met already. He did invite me to a meal out there one night at the Academy, which was quite an experience. I learned what square meals were. Those of you who've been in the military, you recognize that had nothing to do with calories. It's how you eat, and particularly freshman class. Jerry said that and years later, he was back out there and it wasn't quite so strict. John Sowers, Colonel Sowers, came after him, and I'm sure he didn't have it, as bad as what Jerry went through. But anyway, he followed him in the academy. Jerry and I really got acquainted a few years ago. Really acquainted a few years ago. He was wanting to fly all the time. He couldn't fly anymore, so he talked me into riding motorcycles up to Alaska. So he and I took a trip to Alaska on motorcycles and had a great time. Really got better acquainted. I'm not sure how much he's going to talk tonight about the treatments that they had. That'll be up to him all those years. What I thought was kind of interesting, knowing a little bit about what he did or what the fellows went through. We had all this discussion at Guantanamo a few years ago or something about waterboarding. And I would suggest that compared with what those guys went through, waterboarding would be like water skiing, in comparison to what they had. Jerry wrote a piece right after he got out of jail, and I thought it's very describing of him, and it's also a challenge to us. And I thought I'd read that. It doesn't take a minute. Jerry said, "I feel very fortunate now. My efforts as an American soldier in Vietnam only required a few years from me. Many men gave their lives proudly and unselfishly. We cannot do anything for them now. We can't even say thank you. but we can honor them by giving time and effort to make ourselves better citizens, and so doing make the United States of America an even better country. Our country, USA, is not perfect, never will be, but is the best in the world today. Love it, honor it, work for it, protect it, and it will reward you many times over. God bless America. I thought that was I'll just say one more thing before I turn over to Jerry. If anyone doubts the power of prayer, I think you could talk to Jerry about that. It's found out it wasn't necessarily in his time, but in the Lord's time. That's what brought him back. So, Jerry, it's all yours, and Jerry will be available afterwards to answer any questions.
Thank you all. You are way too kind. Thank you. I told John I wanted to talk primarily the organization of my words tonight built around challenge coins. Those of you who have been in the military are probably familiar with them. For those of you who aren't, the challenge coin represents usually a unit, an organization that you are part of, that you are proud of. And one of the things people do with challenge coins is give them to others they appreciate and respect. And this comes from a long tradition, 60 years ago at least. Part of the expectation of giving a challenge coin to another person would be that they would keep it and carry it. And if you ever meet and ask that person to produce the coin and he can't do it, he buys the drinks. I'll talk a little more about those in just a few minutes, but first, there are some words from General Norman Schwarzkopf that are pertinent for me in what I want to talk about tonight. Just a series of quotes in this brief two-page thing I got. The first thing he said was, do what is right, not what you think the higher headquarters wants, or what you think will make you look good. He also said, the truth of the matter is that you always know the right thing to do. The hard part is doing it. Then, true courage is being afraid and going ahead and doing your job anyhow. That's what courage is. Any soldier worth his salt should be anti-war. And still, there are things worth fighting for. And finally, leadership is a potent combination of strategy and character. But if you must be without one, be without strategy. I was privileged to go to the Air Force Academy. The first coin that I have that I'm talking about tonight was prepared for our 50th anniversary in 2012. I got to be in the class of 1962. We were the fourth class to enter the U.S. Air Force Academy, and when we got there, that was the first time that the United States Air Force Academy had a full complement of 4 classes. And we were the freshmen, the doolies, the people that had no rights. And every once in a while, we got a privilege. But I was blessed to be a part of that class.
our guys thought outside the box. Each class had a distinctive name tag color and some of our other gear too. We were the first class to wear the bright red name tag. And the upperclassmen started calling us simply red tag. Excuse me. By the time we had finished summer training, we weren't just the red tags anymore to the upperclassmen. We were the red tag bastards. That's what it says at the top of the front of this coin. We earned that reputation. You see, among other things, our guys figured out that if we were at a service academy, that means we are training to lead men in battle, very possibly for a career, maybe even a lifetime. And that meant we were going to spend our lives doing things that really bad, really mean people really wanted us not to do. So we decided to start practicing on the upperclassmen while we were still there. General Schwarzkopf mentioned character a while ago. One of the first things that we were hit with at the Air Force Academy was the Honor Code. And the Air Force Academy Honor Code simply said, we will not lie, cheat, steal, or tolerate among us those who do. It was hard. There was no forgiveness. You either did it or you didn't. But it wasn't just for the Air Force Academy. If any one of my classmates tells me something today, I know it is the absolute truth so far as he knows it. It was a lifetime commitment. It served us very well. You don't want people without any integrity being the ones saying, you go off into battle to try really hard to win for us. One of the things that we learned there also was that we were preparing for a life that would be measured by a very different kind of metric than almost any other human endeavor. There's a document, one of the first we had to memorize as doolies, called the Code of Conduct. At that time, it was the American Fighting Man's Code of Conduct. The wording has been changed a little bit to accommodate the women who have become a part of the armed forces today, but the idea was still the same. And I can recite that entire 6 articles, it's not that long, still today. And the first article says, I'm an American fighting man. I serve in the forces which guard my country and our way of life. I am prepared to give my life in their defense. Now, what I mean by a different metric is if an Air Force pilot is sent off on a mission in an aircraft, perhaps with an objective, something like destroying an enemy target or troop concentration, if he achieves his objective and destroys the enemy target, the measure of his success is only did he or did he not accomplish that objective. And if he did, his mission was a success. The part that's absent there in just measuring by the mission is his life. And you see, those guys lived their lives measuring the success by accomplishing the mission, and if they got to come back home alive and return to the home base, that was a bonus. And then if they got to bring their craft back without so much damage that it couldn't be repaired to go fly again, that was another bonus. He saved the taxpayers a lot of money. Our lives were measured, our success, by a different metric. We didn't join the armed forces to live forever. If we got to, that was great. But if we didn't, in my opinion, it was still one of the most honorable services that I was ever privileged to be a part of. And I want you to remember that those wearing the uniform of the Armed Forces of the United States, even today, wherever they are in the Middle East, over in the Far East, or any one of a number of places where if they told us, then they'd have to kill us. Because what they are doing and where they are is highly classified. Some of you know, don't you? The second coin, how many of you are familiar with the vegetable brand labeled the Jolly Green Giant? These were the guys that I flew with in Southeast Asia. And I had my thing going here a while ago. I guess I hit my timer. I'm trying to stay within limits here. We had the largest helicopters that were in the Air Force inventory at that time, and when they were painted up with a camouflage color, primarily green, somebody scratched his head on the flight line and said, "That looks like the Jolly Green Giant." And the label stuck. And wherever we flew in Southeast Asia flying combat rescue, our call sign was Jolly Green. And I promise you, every fighter pilot in the theater knew that call sign. A lot of the others changed. Other mission call signs changed every day. Ours was the same all the way through. Now that was good and bad. It was good because when an American aviator was shot down over North Vietnam, and his wingman told him over the emergency radio that he was listening to on the ground that, "I just got off the radio, Jolly Green's on the way." That means he's got a chance. Our mission was combat rescue over North Vietnam. When the strike pilots or the fighter pilots got shot down, we went in to get them. Now, my career as a pilot over there was rather short-lived. I was shot down early. I'd only been a free man in Southeast Asia for a month. Been privileged to make one pickup before that, one rescue. Got shot down on another mission. But I was amazed later on getting to talk to some of the other men who were shot down later. They were all fighter pilots. And we'd trade information, tapping to each other on the wall. And I'd say, "What did you do?" "Well, I was flying an AV-4 and got shot down by a 37 millimeter. "What did you do?" "I was flying a Jolly Green." And the response was almost, "Oh, you are one of those." You see, as far as the other air crews, especially the strike pilots and the fighter pilots that flew over North Vietnam, as far as they were concerned, the guys that I had flown with and were still doing the job as Jolly Greens walked on water and didn't even splash much. One of my classmates who flew a very brutal, very risky fighter mission continually for more than a year described the Jolly Greens as the bravest of the brave. And he described a situation where he had watched a rescue. In fact, part of his job was to assist in the rescues. He was flying F-100s, one of the fast movers. And he described watching a Jolly Green pull into a hover over a downed pilot and sit there in that hover for 3 minutes with the enemy shooting at him from every direction. He's 150 feet off the ground. He's holding perfectly still, and everybody on the enemy side that can see him is doing everything they can to kill him. That's what the Jolly Greens did. Their day would be something like up before the rooster knows it's time to crow, out on the flight line doing his pre-flight with the flashlight, gather his crew together for a briefing about what's expected for the day. Does everybody know their job? Do you have any questions? Go to the intel shack, try to get the latest information on the disposition of enemy anti-aircraft fire, have a cup of coffee, and then wait for the radio call that you hoped would never come, and it usually did. And when the radio call came, the scrambled Jolly Green, the engines are started, the rotors are turning, and the helicopter is moving within 2 minutes because they had preset a bunch of switches. Everybody knew what they were doing, and every minute counted. They never knew where they were going until the instructions were given to them after liftoff, or some other aircraft, one of the downed airmen's wingmen led them in. But they knew this for sure. If the airman who had been shot down was still alive, and if he was in anywhere within a populated area, the North Vietnamese army knew about it. They had left him there because they knew we would be coming. It was a trap. And our guys went out and did it every day anyway. And if you got to live through the mission and rescue the downed airmen, you get back home, on the way, you do a roll call for all your crew. Is everybody okay? Anybody injured or wounded? You got a lot of brand new holes in that helicopter that you didn't have when you took off. You check all the systems very carefully, including the flight engineer in the back. Is everything working? Are we losing oil any place? No, sir. It's fine. We keep going. You tend the downed airman because probably he was badly injured when he was shot down. Remember, the reason he was on the ground was he had gotten blown out of the sky by a surface-to-air missile or anti-aircraft fire. And then he had to eject and hit the wind stream at 500 knots. That's also very violent. And then he would be getting shot at in his parachute while he's on the way down, with a good chance that he would land in the trees, and that's another way to really get hurt badly, coming out of a downed aircraft in a parachute. So the PJ, the paramedic, was taking care of him. When you got back, aircraft was thoroughly checked. Maintenance began almost as soon as you landed. You did all the paperwork, you got your crew together to do your own debrief, and then you went to whoever the next person up the line in your chain of command was, and you gave him your debriefing, and then you got to have a beer or two with maybe even a cold dinner. And your reward for doing all that was you got to get up and do the same thing the next morning. And we did not lack for volunteers. Ours was absolutely the best mission any place in the entire United States Air Force, because that was one of our people out there. And if we didn't get to him, he would probably either die or end up a prisoner of war, and there was a lot of debate about which was worse. Those were the Jolly Greens. The motto of Air Rescue Service is that others may live. When the smoke finally cleared at the end of the war, there were almost 4,000 Americans who had been rescued by Jolly Greens, who got to come home, hug their wives, their kids, maybe raise some more kids, and go on and live useful, productive lives because of what those guys did. was a most rewarding mission. Yeah, we took some losses, but we won more than we lost. And everybody did their part to make it go. Third coin I have is for the Vietnam POWs. The motto inscribed on here is "Return with Honor." I was shot down on 6th of November 1965. The bad guys found my parachute in the tree about a company of North Vietnamese regulars. I wasn't 100 yards away when they found my parachute. My heart was going 100 miles an hour with gusts up to 150. We'd been hit by a 37 millimeter, caught us in the main fuel cell, and the whole helicopter was an instant torch. I had third-degree burns on 3 different parts of my bodies and a couple of other burns too. Parts where the flying suit and the gloves didn't cover and the helmet didn't come quite down to the back of the neck and things like that. All 4 of us that were on that crew got out alive. Our flight engineer was rescued that night by a Navy helicopter that came in from the Gulf. That same Navy helicopter was right over my head a couple of times till I had to shut down my radio because he was getting the stuffing shot out of it. I had about a company of North Vietnamese troops surrounded. They were shooting at him. There was no way he was going to get to me. I found a little place to hide. I managed to evade for 5 days before I decided I was either going to get a drink of water or I was going to get caught trying. And I got caught trying. I lost my canteen on bailout. I had some survival rations for food, but if you eat, your body uses up water a lot faster. I could last a lot longer if I didn't eat. So at the end of 5 days without food or water, I was in pretty bad shape. I was captured. It took us 6 days for me to get to Hanoi. They stopped a couple of times to allow me to be the local show and tell. The general routine was 2 meals a day, always sparse, and a little bit of water, and there was never enough of food or water for 7 years. We used to talk about food, even when we were just in single cells, tapping on the wall, and it was laborious to communicate that way. But food was one of our preoccupations. I was sick with bad diarrhea for the first year plus. The food really wasn't all that good, but if you're hungry enough, you'll eat it. The only reason the North Vietnamese kept any of us American aviators alive was they considered us very, very heavy-duty political capital. North Vietnam didn't have anything to negotiate away if there were a negotiated settlement at the end of the war, except for us. By the way, gentlemen, who's one of many new best friends of mine, you may have heard of Ross Perot down in Dallas. Ross Perot offered his own money at $1 million a head for the American prisoners of war. North Vietnamese didn't want any of it. We were worth a whole lot more than that to them, politically. One of the things I always like to do when I have the opportunity to tell people about being a prisoner of war in North Vietnam was that time as a prisoner of war in North Vietnam was God's most gracious gift to me next to my salvation. It was awful. It was terrible. But God loved me enough to give me what I needed instead of what I wanted. And even in that situation up there, He took care of it. I didn't come to give a sermon tonight, but you need to hear that. A couple of bright sides. My prayer life improved dramatically when I got shot down. I have never prayed before or since like I did then. And there are times when I wish I could have that back. Just for that reason. By the way, the prayer life started while I was in the parachute, getting shot at. And it continued all the way through the 7+ years. Second bright side, our leadership. We had, when I got shot down, we already had 3 senior officers who were there as prisoners of war in North Vietnam. Those who had been leading squadrons and wings of men in battle. Jim Stockdale, commander when he shot down, CAG, or the wing commander off the USS Aerospace. He retired with 3 stars. Robbie Reisman was an F-105 squadron commander. Before he got captured, he had already brought 105 back from a mission that was so badly shot up, when he landed, they just bulldozed it off the runway into a junk pile. He bailed out of another one and got rescued. And when he arrived in Hanoi, at his first interrogation, the interrogating officer pulls out a copy of Time magazine, slaps it down on the table and says, "We know who you are, Robinson Reiner." They didn't know how to pronounce his name, because his picture was on the cover of Time magazine, because of his military exploits over there. The third one was Jerry Singleton. Retired from the Navy with a couple of stars and then went on to be a U.S. Senator in Alabama. He's the one, when he got off the first airplane to land at Clark Air Base, bringing American POWs out of Hanoi, was given a microphone and said words to the effect that we are honored to have served our nation under very difficult circumstances. God bless America. You still see that occasionally today, that little video clip. Those guys were leaders. I was just a first lieutenant. I wasn't worth anything for propaganda value or military information. But the whole time the Vietnamese were on the backs of those 3 leaders, everybody else under them was getting a rest. And the Vietnamese were on their backs because they were being leaders. And they were issuing orders and they were maintaining control of their command, which, as this coin says, was the 4th Allied POW Wing. The 4th War, in which we had American aviators down as prisoners, along with those of other nations. First World War, Second World War, Korea. And in Vietnam, we had some Thai and Laotian and South Vietnamese who were also flying various missions, most of them covert, and had been captured, who were there with us, helped us greatly. The most important lesson I learned from watching all those men, and we had a core group that was there for the longest time together, about 350 men. They just kept doing the right thing. Day after day, the enemy would call them in for an interrogation, say, you must write a war crimes confession. They'd say no. The Vietnamese would say, if you don't, we will punish you. That's their euphemism for torture. Man says no. So they punished him. They had a lot of different ways of doing it. I still have 10 toes and 10 fingers. All of their methods of torture, for the most part, were designed not to leave any external scars. And you would be amazed at how much enduring and deep pain you could inflict without ever leaving a mark on the person's body. One of their novelties we called the rope trick. It had a lot of variations. They tie your elbows together behind your back and pull until your elbows did bump back there. Then they handcuff you at the wrists and squeeze the handcuffs down until they dug into the flesh. And then if that wasn't enough, they'd take a rope. They'd tie it between the handcuffs behind your back, and they'd throw it up over a meat hook on the ceiling, and they'd hoist you up so you're hanging there by your wrists, behind your back. They might beat on you a little bit, but time would also work in their favor because eventually the shoulders begin to dislocate. And I remember listening to one of the guys that I knew there named Mike McGrath. He had been flying an 84, I think, when he was shot down. And he says, when they did that to me, he says, the first to go was the left, and he says, that wasn't all bad because he said, I had already broken it in the ejection. And they could keep inflicting the pain and inflicting the pain. And I remember trying to figure out how to describe it. And it would go on, and it would go on, and it would go on. Till your body just says, we've got to do something to stop this. The spirit's willing. But you can only take so much pain for so long. So then they'd leave you up there a little while longer and beat on you some more and finally bring you down, put a pen and paper in front of you for you to write your war crimes confession. And I remember, I don't know who it was that did this, I heard it read over the Voice of Vietnam. A guy named Bertrand Russell, who was a Brit, was trying to gin up a war crimes tribunal to try all the American prisoners in North Vietnam. And this guy says, okay, I'm very sorry for what I did. I was only following the orders of my wing commander, Colonel Steve Kenyon. You younger ones won't get that, I understand it. The older ones will. Comic strip character. Used to enjoy reading him every Sunday when I was a kid. And then he went on to say, but I felt so badly. My wingman. You see, he was killed on another mission just a week ago. His name was Clark Kent, and I'm the one that had to tell his fiancée, Lois Lane, what had happened to him. Now, think about all that this guy has just been through. And he's still fighting everything he's got left. One other thing to keep in mind, we could have stopped all that torture anytime we wanted to. We could have had 3 or 4 or 5 meals a day if that's what we wanted. And all we wanted to eat and all we wanted to drink, we'd probably gotten some beer thrown into the mix. All we had to do was just quit resisting. The stuff they were asking us to do was not provide highly classified military information. It was just propaganda. All we had to do was write it. And I watched those guys, starting from the leaders on down, every day, day after day, face the enemy, say no to his face, know exactly what the consequences were going to be. In the case of Ev Alvarez, who was the first American prisoner of war shot down over there, that was more than 8 years. I remember I was still solo in solitary confinement, been moved from the Hanoi Hilton out to another camp we called the Zoo. The Vietnamese would have kept us all in solitary the whole time if they could have. They just didn't have the resources to do it. And I was at the zoo, and other guys were picking up my toilet bucket. They weren't letting me out. I was still too new. And one of them would distract the guard over here, and the other would say, "New guy, what's your name?" And I'd give him my name. And then another time, a week or so later, another guy came up to get my toilet bucket. He says, "Jerry, how you doing?" I said, "I'm fine. Who are you?" He says, "I'm Ev Alvarez." I said, "Oh, how long have you been here, Ev?" He said, "A little over a year." And I hung my head and I cried then, because I knew there was no way I could live that long. But the Lord knew, and I did. And the time went on, and I finally got to come home. And I would say this: the ongoing threat, as we described it from the enemy, was torture, death, and maybe even worse. Now, I don't know what could be worse than torture or death, but, you know, it's gallows humor. Death was not the scary part. Death was having information that you knew would compromise your fellow POWs and the nation and a whole lot of other things. And if the Vietnamese knew you had that information, they could keep pressing with the pain until they got it. And there wasn't a good way to die to keep that from happening. If there had been a machine gun nest charge, every one of us would have been standing trying to be at the head of the line to be first. Let them kill me. After that, they can't do anything any worse. But that wasn't one of the options. And we had a job to do. When that time was finally over, U.S. Air Force C-141, 3 of them the day that I was released, made their way into Hanoi, part of the negotiated agreement. We were handed across the line to U.S. Air Force personnel, one at a time as our names were read. U.S. Airmen would take us by the arm, maybe 2, the guy was on crutches, walk us out to the 141, put us on, take care of us. Finally, it was time to take off. Aircraft was buttoned up, started rolling, taxied out to the runway. Hear the engines run up, start rolling, take off. You hear the gear funk into the wheel wells, and it was just, on the aircraft I was on, it was dead silence. You see, especially those of us that had been there a while, we'd had what we referred to as peace scares a lot of times before, and it never worked out. Even on this occasion, when they were driving us out to Geelong Airport, they stopped the bus, put us off on a little siding, ran us into some small building there under armed guard, and said, "The Americans have broken the agreement, you're not going home today." And they would do that anytime, any place, and do anything to mess it up they could. So when we took off, none of us said anything. We were free. When the wheels plunked into the well, it was still quiet. You see, there were a whole lot of things that could still go wrong, and we not get home. Then the aircraft commander comes on the radio and says, "Gentlemen, we are feet wet." That means we've crossed the coast of North Vietnam. We are now over water over the Gulf of Tonkin. Still quiet. A little while later, the aircraft commander comes onto the radio one more time and says, "Gentlemen, we are out of MiG range." The whole place went up for grabs, because the worst that could happen to us from then on was we crash in the ocean and drown. When the war ended, all the guys that I was privileged to be there with returned with honor. We accomplished our mission. The North Vietnamese did not accomplish their mission with respect to us, which was to subdue us and make us their slaves so that we would provide whatever propaganda they wanted to do anything they said. We lost several guys killed. A lot of guys endured a whole lot of pain. But they returned with honor. Now, here's the other side of that story. At the end of the war, Congress, bowing to the public opinion created by the news media, surrendered for us. South Vietnam is now under communist rule. The city I knew as Saigon is now called Ho Chi Minh City, after North Vietnam's communist dictator. One final note. A guy named Paul Galante, Navy guy, retired as a captain, an exceptional young man. When he has had the opportunity to speak, he's made the final observation that there is no such thing as a bad day when there's a doorknob on your side of the door. Thank you all. God bless you.
We're going to have a short question and answer session for any of you that would like to ask Jerry a question. We'll do it for about 15 minutes or so. Afterwards, if Jerry doesn't mind, we'll all go be outside, have a glass of wine, have a chance to meet and shake his hand. So if any of you would like to raise your hand, either Cindy or your team will bring the microphone to you, you can ask a question.
Can I say one other thing?
I promise you that I do have more time in jail than almost all the rest of John's relatives.
Colonel, you quoted General Schwarzkopf.
Yes, sir.
Oh, by the way, before I forget, a fellow by the name of Duke Cunningham couldn't be here tonight. He sent his regards.
You know, I heard he did some good work over North Vietnam. Few MiGs that no longer fly because of him.
Oh, yeah. Anyway, my question was, I didn't notice, and there's a reason I asked this because of some experience, you didn't give any quotes about Secretary McNamara.
Okay? Brief story. One of the first questions that I was asked when I arrived at somebody of North Vietnamese military who could speak English was, what do I think of, he didn't pronounce the names well, Johnson, President Johnson, McNamara, the Secretary of Defense, and Dina Ruska, the Secretary of State. My personal feeling is If I traded them to you and got a wooden nickel in return, I would feel ashamed because I cheated you. There are several stories that affected the military monumentally in terrible ways. One was, early in that first couple of years anyway, a regular Tuesday meeting in the White House to plan strategy and tactics for the coming week and whatever future they foresaw. The only people who were not allowed at that meeting were those who wore the uniform of the Armed Forces of the United States. Those who would do the work, those who knew how to do it. And by the way, when we finally ended the war with the B-52s, the heavies coming in, that was the recommendation of the men in uniform before we launched that first strike in August of 1964. There's a lot more, but yes, ma'am.
I wonder if you remember the name of the pilot you rescued.
Yes, I do. I think he was a lieutenant commander at the time, Bill Wheat. Did you know him?
No, I have a friend who was the first Navy pilot shot down in Vietnam and was rescued.
Okay.
And he has written a book about it. It's quite interesting.
There are a lot of stories that are well worth writing and reading. You know,
I wonder if you talk a little bit about the TAP code, how it was developed and how it worked and stuff.
when I arrived there, the TAP code was already going. This was our means of communication. And apologies to the Navy, we could have used Morse code. All the Navy guys knew it, Air Force didn't use it, so we were out of luck. An Air Force F-105 pilot named Smitty Harris, Carlisle Smith Harris, shot down before I was, had learned it as a teenager. And basically what the TAP code did was arrange the alphabet in a 5-row, 5-column matrix, 25 letters. But there's 26 in the alphabet. Yes, there are. We just doubled up on the C and the K. If you got the code for that letter, you had to figure out which was intended from the context. You would type one tap for each column that you wanted to go across that matrix, and then one tap for each row that you wanted to come down that matrix. It took a while to learn it. But you need to hear this. Every night in Hanoi, if it was humanly possible, every POW heard that message. 5 letters, GNGBU. Good night, God bless you. And Tom McNish, one of my friends, there's a good documentary that was done many years ago, if you're interested in more, also titled Return with Honor. Tom McNish was being interviewed on that, and he says, we passed the equivalent of War and Peace many times over through the years. It's slow, but if you just keep going, you can do a lot. Now, those who use shorthand and texting today had nothing on us, I assure you. It was very important to us. It was our lifeblood, and it got expanded to more uses than you would ever possibly imagine. They gave us a little broom to sweep out the courtyard. Sweep, 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 and so on. There was one camp, where's the young lady, Air Force Colonel, who knew Sam Johnson? Okay. Sam Johnson was one of a dozen American prisoners of war that were taken to a camp we called Alcatraz. They were stubborn resistors who, in the words of the Vietnamese, had a very bad attitude. And there, everybody was in a single cell, and you couldn't tap on a common wall most of the time. So what they did was and we were so sick so much at the time that hacking and coughing and sneezing was not new. And they communicated to each other by just those bodily functions. And the bad guys never knew it. So the tap code was very important.
Have you ever met any of the Korean prisoners of war? I had a teacher in 65 who had been in the Korean.
I have not personally, but I do know this. The U.S. had a terrible experience as prisoners of war in Korea because that was the first time we had Americans being held as prisoners of a communist country. We had no idea what to expect. Most other countries, if they took prisoners, they just warehoused them until the war was over, didn't spend any extra money on them for medical treatment. The communists exploit their prisoners, primarily for propaganda, but for anything else they can get out of it. We were not prepared for that in Korea. The good news out of that is that our people went to school on that Korean experience. And when I went to the Air Force Survival School, they taught me what had been learned in that situation. And what I've told people in talking about my experience is I spent the whole first year as a prisoner of war in North Vietnam without ever having a surprise. I could write the script for them. I didn't know where they'd start. I didn't know exactly which turns they'd take. But I knew what their options were. And when we get to this point, he's either going to do this or that. Nothing makes being a prisoner of war easy. Knowing what to expect is a tremendous advantage to the POWs, and it was to us. So I'm sorry for those guys in Korea. I'm thankful for what we learned from them.
We take a couple more.
I attended an Air Force Academy graduation ceremony in 1964. What year did you graduate from?
I graduated in 1962. That was 2 years after us. And the class of 1964 was very well represented in Hanoi. I'm sorry they had to be, but those guys went to pilot training right out of the academy. They went to fighter upgrade school right out of that, and by 66 late or 67, they were in the war.
Were you involved with Jane Fonda while you were in the Hilton?
Hanoi Jane. You know, we've never invited her to any of our reunions yet. But I know some of the guys that were tortured to go meet her and tell her how well they were being treated. One of them, a friend of mine, Jerry Driscoll, died not too many months ago. There were several. And that's just exactly what happened. Nobody wanted to get mixed up with her. And you saw the pictures of her sitting behind the North Vietnamese gun emplacements, et cetera, et cetera. I'll just say I don't have anything good to say about that woman.
We take one more.
Thank you for offering your Vietnam. Our dear friend was shot down August 1st, 1966, in his F-104. He was brought home in 1984 in a little box.
Yes.
His name was John Kortnick, and I just wondered if you knew him.
I did not know him. To my knowledge, he was never appealed up. There are still ongoing efforts to locate the remains of a large number, over 1,000 men, who were lost over North Vietnam and have not had their remains repatriated yet.
We were glad that they brought him back. We went to Arlington.
Okay, good.
Thank you.
And honor the man. Thank you. Let me say one other quick thing. I was appealed up for 7 years. I got to come home. A lot of people didn't. A lot of our guys say we were the lucky ones. They did it.
We're glad you're here too, Jerry, and glad you're able to meet with us tonight. We're glad we're able to bring this program to you. I don't know many of us that have dry eyes. Let me mention a couple things for you guys. I thank Jerry, we're indebted to you for your service, and so glad you returned to us, as I said, for such a harrowing experience. Hot Springs Village has many veterans, but few of them have endured what Jerry went through. Thanks again, and we really need to show Jerry how much we appreciate his sacrifices.